I'm Lisa LeVasseur from Internet Safety Labs, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 422 for March 31st, 2025. And of course, we've got an interview for you today. We'll be talking with Lisa LeVasseur from Internet Safety Labs and their really cool new tool called the App Microscope. A couple quick notes before we get into that. First of all, if you have ever worked with 23andMe or perhaps have given somebody a gift of the DNA testing site 23andMe, or have friends and family that have used it, if you have not already seen the news, they are going bankrupt. And as I talked about on the show when this first kind of cropped up, now would be a fantastic time for you to ask them to delete your data right away because, they're going to be selling it to somebody. That data is worth a lot of money and creditors want their money back. So I'm sure that they will find some way to monetize your data, and that's not a good thing. And by the way, not only do you want to ask them, demand if you can, depending on where you live, to delete your data, you should definitely ask them to also destroy any genetic material of yours as well. And if you don't think that's weird, look up the story of Henrietta Lacks. You know what? I'll put a link to the show notes, so I'll save you the trouble. Look at the show notes, and that will explain this cautionary tale. So I will note again that this kind of more urgent or timely information is things that I would post on social media. So if you'd like to kind of learn about these things right away, at least for, the ones I find, go to fdsd.me/contact, and there you will find all of my various social media handles if you would like to follow me there. Also, I will absolutely be talking about this entire Signal debacle with the Houthi attack plans and all of that. Yeah, there's a whole lot of political stuff. I'm going to skip that, but trust me, there are a lot of serious cybersecurity and national security problems around that as well, which I will be focused on. And the media has, some media outlets have kind of screwed it up. For example, a lot of stories seem to imply that there was some sort of a leak or a problem with Signal itself. There is not. Let me just get that out of the way right now. But it still wasn't secure, and it wasn't because of Signal. So anyway, I will get into all of that next week. So today we are going to be talking about apps, and we have been installing apps on our smartphones for almost 2 decades now. This all got started on both Android and iPhone in 2008, if you can believe that. It's been that long. And in all that time, we still don't have a robust framework in place to let us know exactly what these apps are doing. We ostensibly know who makes the app. In the App Store, it has the manufacturer or the maker or the company that owns it there. We've had attempts to try to put privacy nutrition labels on these apps and privacy policies that supposedly tell us exactly what this app is doing in terms of what data it's collecting and who it's sharing us with. But as I'm sure we all know, and anybody knows who's looked at any of those things, they are very vague. They are often wrong, and they definitely are obfuscated in the sense that they really don't want you to know what's going on. But it's actually worse than that. And as I've said many times on this show, apps today, the things we load on our phones or even the things we install on our computers are really an amalgamation of software, kind of a Frankenstein's monster of third-party software libraries and software development kits, SDKs, from who knows who. Often, actually, as developers, software developers, what comes down to whatever is free and easiest to integrate with your product. Because nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. But the problem is that when you do that, you're bringing in all sorts of exposures, potentially, in both security and privacy, from all of these third parties. And you're counting on them to disclose to you, the software developer, so that you can pass this on to your users, what they are doing. And to make matters even more worse, these apps and even their third-party dependencies are constantly changing. Not just the software itself, because, there are updates and new features and bug fixes, but also the owner of the software, who is operating that software, who is taking control of that software, often changes as well. Popular software development kits and libraries and even entire apps change ownership all the time, and it is not well communicated. Certainly the fact that it has changed is generally not communicated at all. And I think frankly, there should be an automated way for that to happen. And so Lisa is part of a very small group of dedicated individuals who are trying to expose as much of this information to us as they can. And they're doing it through various mechanisms, some through open source kind of intelligence and some through direct monitoring of the software to try to help us understand what these apps are really doing under the covers. And it's really, honestly, quite shocking what they're finding. So we're going to get into all that today. Real quick before we do, let me do my usual dictionary here of some of the jargon that we talk about. We talk about EdTech, that is short for education technology. And this is sort of like AdTech, advertising technology. This is the industry that has grown up around creating software for the education industry. And this could be for instructors or school systems or testing providers, things like that. We also talk about COPPA and FERPA. These are laws around children's privacy. COPPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which came out in 1998, by the way. But worse still, FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, actually came out in 1974. So how well do you think these privacy acts are going to handle modern software? And then finally, I do mention something with kind of a funny name. It's called Burp Suite. I don't know why I got that name. It's by a company called Portswigger. It's a tool used by people who analyze software. And that might be hackers, but it's also people like Internet Safety Labs, where you want to basically be able to insert yourself into the HTTPS or other secure connections coming from a piece of software or from an app so you can kind of look and see what information it's exchanging with other servers around the internet. So that's what that's about. And don't worry too much about that unless you're interested in learning about it yourself, in which case I put a link in the show notes to help you get started with that. So anyway, with all of that as preamble, let's get to our interview with Lisa LeVasseur. Lisa's the founder, executive director, and research director of Internet Safety Labs, or ISL, a nonprofit technology watchdog dedicated to exposing risky behaviors of software and software-driven technology. She has over 3 decades in industry, including developing mobile phone software for Motorola. And today, her time with ISL melds her lifelong study of philosophy and computer science. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I forget actually how I came across what you guys were doing, but it was real interesting. And I remember reaching out to you and say, we should get together and talk about this, which we will now do today. And Internet Safety Labs does really cool stuff. But let's start with some basics. How did you come to start ISL? And give us a better, more general description of what your mission is there.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit, too, of the history. So we started off life as the Me2B Alliance, an industry standards developing organization, because I have a long background in interoperability standards for mobile telephony. So I'm one of the weird people who actually likes industry standards work. But I realized that we needed a different kind of standard, and we needed something that brought consumers to the table, because historically consumers have no role in developing industry standards. And that's an ongoing kind of critical omission, I would say. But so we started off in that vein, and it became obvious that what we were working on really was a safety standard, although not having ever been involved in them, I didn't have the vocabulary for it. But we realized that we were developing a safety standard. And we also realized that people did not want to be involved in making safety standards. They just, they don't want to see the sausage being made. They just want to know the sausage is safe to eat,
Sure.
And that makes sense. Like, it shouldn't be their job to do that, quite frankly.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, we rebranded as Internet Safety Labs, and really the mission has never changed. The mission has always been about giving everybody awareness into the risks of the technologies that we use on a daily basis.
And your focus has been EdTech, right? Education technology?
I would say we have the most experience with EdTech. It's where we started.
Okay.
And we started with that because of the audience of children and the vulnerability. We prioritize our efforts based on vulnerability. And so, I'm also eager to do different verticals for seniors and for minorities and, other communities as well. So
I talk a lot in this podcast about data mining and the apps that we adults choose to install and the websites that we choose to visit, but students in particular are often required to use school-provided, like, say, hardware and software like Chromebooks, or install monitoring software on their laptops. Or, maybe just the regular school app, some sort of school-affiliated app, or their county school system app on their phones for grades or what have you. This is fundamentally different situation in a lot of ways from the adult situation. And I know you've covered this extensively. So and I also bet a lot of adults in the audience might not be, unless they've got kids that have gone through this, may not be familiar with what's going on there. So what is the ostensible purpose of this kind of software, and what are the privacy risks? How is it different?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I like I want to just touch on the very first thing you said, because I think there's this power dynamic difference with students. And actually, we've been working for over a year now with some professors at Brigham Young, and they've written some really nice things kind of articulating more of the academic scholarly work around those dynamics and how they play differently. So I want to just kind of like shout out to them and some of the research that they've done.
Yeah.
But it's a very unique scenario. We as adults have the same thing with medical providers, for example. Like, a lot of our medical providers will foist a personal health record service on us, and we don't have any control over that. We can't be like, oh, well, I have my own hosted one and let me bring that to you.
Right.
We use whatever is presented to us. For children in schools, it's more profound in the sense that there's so much more technology that is being foisted upon them. And so everything is getting digitized. So like grade books, lesson plans, student information systems, everything is digitized. So students are being exposed to a number of technologies just for the infrastructure of the school itself, just like, enrollment and all of everything. And we have gotten very familiar with this. We were not knowledgeable at all when we started, but we had to make sense of the EdTech taxonomy and figure out, like, well, what are all the kinds of things that they have and that they're required to use. What we also found, though, was that on top of all of that, which is, by the way, riddled with safety risks in a sense, in the sense of most modern technology includes marketing technologies. And so those almost always, I'm going to caveat my way around this, but they almost always have exposures of sharing data to third parties. And so what we have seen is that these, I'm going to call it like core EdTech, which is that kind of like core infrastructure that schools are using. There are risks in that. The schools vet that stuff pretty carefully, but they're really at the mercy of what the vendors are telling them. They don't have the expert resources. Like, they don't have like corporate IT in the sense that a lot of corporations do. So they have to take it at their word and, kind of hope for the best. But that's a piece of it. The other thing we saw is that educators and schools are recommending scores of services and apps to students. And one of the interesting things we found is that like about 30% of the technologies that we found either recommended or required were really not even EdTech. They were outside of EdTech entirely. Things like newspapers, things like references, like the zoo, the museum, Wikipedia, tons of news places. And so anyway, the other dynamic I would say that we saw is that I think teachers, bless their hearts, think more is more. And so recommend more technologies. And then we also saw, sadly, that there was little evidence that there was any vetting of those recommended technologies happening. And also, this is the second time I've said this today already, we looked at the efficacy of regulations compared to R scoring in the benchmark. And COPPA is very good.
Children's
COPPA Safe
Online
Harbor.
Protection Act?
good. Sorry, I'm riddled with
Yeah,
acronyms.
yeah.
So there's COPPA Safe Harbor basically certifies these organizations that will certify, it sanctions organizations to certify technology for children as being COPPA compliant.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at how that compared to our own audits and how safe we rated things as. And what we found was that they were very effective in removing behavioral ads, which is really what COPPA is mostly doing, but
Mm-hmm.
it didn't remove ads totally, and it certainly didn't stop any data sharing from to data brokers and to risky third parties. So anyway, I think I strayed, but
Well, no, but you also called attention to the fact that as adults, there are situations like this. Another place where we as adults hit this oftentimes is with work. Sometimes our
yeah,
where we
exactly.
work forces us to install certain software. Sometimes even today, monitoring software, which is just gross. But the difference I would think with kids in particular is that first is generational difference. Kids today are just used to installing apps willy-nilly, right? Like that's just what you do. You got a smartphone, you got a new thing. Oh, it's a new app. There's an app for that. I install that. And then also they're just younger and more naive. They don't have the life experience to know, do I really want to do that? Or what are the consequences of doing that? So I would definitely think that the power dynamics are different in that regard as well.
Yeah, absolutely they are. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
you're right, that employee thing is actually it is a big deal right now in terms of privacy and privacy risk.
And a lot of this came up, from the pandemic as well. And I'm sure some of this existed prior in both adult and, at work and kids at school. But I'm sure that once we all had to be at home and try to get something done at home, bosses and school systems don't trust that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and want to verify. And so, they put, I remember my kids were there during the pandemic, one early college, one late high school. And they had to install some really nasty monitoring software, especially for tests. The proctoring software I thought was horrible.
The proctoring stuff is gross. Yeah.
Just gross. So I know that your study, I think, was 2022, which would have been right kind of in the heart of all that. What is your take on that in particular? How did you notice that the pandemic changed the flavor or the nature or how intense some of these mandates were or the tracking involved?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that we only have the one snapshot, right? We only
Yeah.
have our look at that one moment in time, and we didn't. So it's hard to know, how big of an increase it was. Certainly, it was an increase, as you were mentioning. We were living more of our lives mediated through digital platforms. That was just a fact and students for sure were experiencing that. So we know that. And there was a very good piece. I don't know if it was Future Privacy Forum or somebody wrote about, tried to quantify the effect of what was happening with EdTech during COVID. So it certainly grew. And so for our benchmark, it's like you and I were chatting earlier, it's very possible and perhaps likely that the numbers of technologies that we saw, we saw schools with hundreds of apps that they were recommending, hundreds, over 1,000. In fact, I think we saw one school in Colorado, I believe it was, with over 1,000 services that had been approved for student use, and we don't really know okay, is this normal? We don't know what normal is. It was our first benchmark. We'd have to measure again to really see, was that, has it ebbed at all? Has it slowed down? I don't know.
Well, one of the ways we like to say that users have choices, at least in the United States, the way we've done privacy is all this notice and consent model. We inform you, and then you get to make the choice, and it's all on you, right? Well, you know where I'm going with this. But again, though, it's different with adults versus kids. In fact, COPPA, I believe, is one of the laws that directly address that. That's where I think, isn't that the one where you've got to be 13 or older to get a Facebook account or something without parents' permission or something, right? So it's in the case of students, where does the control lie? What do the students themselves, maybe if they're older, or do the parents have some way to limit data collection or opt out of data collection or disable some monitoring features? How does that play out when you're talking about minors and students?
Yeah, okay, so I am not a lawyer, but I'm going to say some comments about regulations now.
Mm.
So I encourage all listeners to double check what I'm about to say. But so there's two laws that come into play for student privacy. One is FERPA, Family, I don't even know what it stands for, FERPA, FERPA.
Yeah.
It's some kind of Family Privacy Rights Act thing.
Family
And
Education Rights and Privacy Act.
there you go. Thank you.
I had to look it up.
There's FERPA and there's COPPA. And they have different regulatory bodies. COPPA is overseen by the FTC, and FERPA is overseen by the Department of Education, which may
Okay.
not be around for much longer, which is
Okay. Yes.
of interest in this discussion. So FERPA was the thing that was trying to control like the paper records. It's a very old law.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's the paper like that. It was written in the time of schools having paper records for
I didn't
everything.
realize that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's an older law. But FERPA has the ability in it for schools to consent on behalf of students under certain circumstances.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there
That
are
sounds
these
weird.
like limited exceptions for how the school can consent on behalf of students. I think there's an enormous amount of confusion over whether or not schools can consent. And my understanding is that FERPA does allow that. COPPA does not allow that. Schools do not fully understand that because we saw a number of schools that said, we're consenting to the following list of hundreds of apps on behalf of the student under COPPA, which is a falsehood. That is not possible. And in fact, the rules that the FTC published earlier this year, after I want to say almost 2 years of looking at it, we provided comments last year on it. They really try to tighten that up and make sure that there is a consent, a parental consent action in there. That was an important thing to have and to clarify. And so I believe that has been addressed for the better in this latest batch of rules that have come out. So it's confusing landscape. Schools, I think, are confused. Everybody's confused about it.
Which, by the way, I think is by design in some cases. Some of the certainly privacy policies in terms of services are often are not meant to be transparent as they claim to be.
Yeah. Well, and then getting back to the fundamental issue of are parents even consenting when they're consenting? Because there are some really wonderful advocates out there working very hard on this kind of stuff, like Heidi Sauce is working on this. And we work with the EdTech Law Center with Julie and Andy Liddell in Austin. And quite often it's a case of like, you must consent to our use of these platforms, these like this EdTech infrastructure, right? I'll use that to distinguish that from the sort of like ABC game or whatever. But parents will find themselves, and I've heard this from a number of parents, they will find themselves basically coerced into compliant, into providing consent. They will be told that their child will fall behind, will not be able to participate in the classroom activities, and basically they have no alternative. There really is no alternative that they're provided with. So it's comply or don't. And the other thing I will say too is that we've been looking at these larger EdTech platforms a little bit more closely. And one of the disturbing things I'm observing, and there's going to be more coming out about this in several arenas, I think, in the next year or so, some of these companies are starting to look like data brokers, marketing platforms, like the EdTech themselves have. It's as if they've realized like, oh, wait, we've got a lot of data here. We've got a lot of personal information.
Right.
And I think if memory serves, on the PowerSchool board, there is an executive from LiveRamp, which is one of the biggest data brokers in the world. Yeah, so I think stay tuned on this front, because I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny and exposure of what these platforms, these mandatory platforms, are actually doing.
Well, and collect it and they will come. I mean, these are just giant honeypots of information. Even if you collect this data and ostensibly protect it, it's just like PowerSchool was breached, right?
Yeah, that's why you know the name. But even beyond that, before that, I think there's a class action about the data collection and unconsented data collection practices.
All right, so a little more generic, and let's just talk about applications in general today. And that is, and I've said this before, as a software engineer, I know this is true, but applications today, and I mean not just applications on your computer, but apps on your phone, are really kind of a Frankenstein amalgamation of third-party software development kits and support libraries. No developer wants to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I'll give me a shopping cart library over here, give me an SDK over here, which will do most of the UE for me. And I could just gotta add, I want a button here kind of thing. And there's all these frameworks and things, which is great as a software engineer. It saves us a lot of time, right? However, we don't control what a lot of these things are doing. So help the audience understand how many different SDKs, for example, might be in one app. And do you think that the app developers actually know what those SDKs are really doing?
Okay, well, how many SDKs can be in an app? I was just looking at the worst label in our batch of benchmark apps. I pick on this poor school. This app is no longer available on the App Store. I'm happy to report.
All right, good.
Yeah, but it was the worst app at the time, and it was a community engagement platform app, and it had 21 SDKs.
Wow.
The average number of SDKs in this category, this is a community engagement platform app, was 9.2 SDKs was the average for the category, which is still,
right.
a little on the high side. Also, to put this in perspective, this app had 149 companies between SDKs and observed network traffic and 30 data brokers. One data broker SDK. One of those 21 SDKs was a data broker SDK. So it varies. To answer your question, how many SDKs are in there? It varies. It really varies. I will tell you this. We have scored, we've given privacy risk scores to all of the SDKs. There's about 600 SDKs that we've identified through third-party sources, and we've scored them all. And we've also looked at them, and the vast majority of them, I don't have the numbers handy with me right now, but the vast majority of these SDKs perform an advertising or marketing function, like analytics, or actually put an ad in my game. Like, that's what they do. So most of the SDKs in that batch of 600 or so are actually quite high risk from our point of view. Because if they're installing an app, then they're leaking data into the real-time bidding infrastructure to thousands of entities out there. So...
Yeah, okay, so there's a few things in there I want to unpack. So first of all, so real-time bidding, RTB, this is the notion of when you see an ad on a web page or when you see an ad in an app, a lot of times, it's not like the software developer is constantly saying, okay, let me put an ad for this there today. They have rented out that space like a billboard. And in fact, the SDK manages all of that for them. In fact, the way a lot of that works is they say, hey, here's a free SDK, or even better yet, here's an SDK, and if you give me your payment information, I'll give you a cut of the stuff we put in this billboard. And maybe you can request, I don't want any porn ads or I don't want any alcohol ads because this is a kid's app. But other than that, you don't really control what's going in there. You just said, here's some ad space, fill it with whatever you want, send me a check at the end of the month. And right. And so that, because you might be asking, why in the world would these developers do that? Well, if I get this functionality for free and maybe I even get to make a little money on top of that, why wouldn't I?
Monetization.
Yes, of our kids, which is even better.
Yeah. And so the thing that can't be really overstated at all is that, so every time there's a little space that pops up on your phone where an ad lives, this infrastructure, this advertising infrastructure, will start an auction to get an ad for that little space.
Right.
That
this is the real-time bidding. Yes.
Yeah. This real-time bidding process then sends a little bit of personal information or a lot of bit of personal information, depending on what, how that's been configured. And that goes out into this ad tech infrastructure. And there are literally thousands of entities that will bid on that, meaning they get access to whatever that little bit of information is in that bid request. And so it's a propagation that is really quite staggering of, a little bit of information to a lot of people. And sometimes that little bit of information includes location. So
Yeah.
the size is not reflective of the risk in this stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Johnny Ryan, who I've interviewed a couple times, called it, I think, the biggest data breach in U.S. history.
He does.
Yeah.
Love that work. And he's absolutely right. It is the biggest ongoing data breach that we have. And, in all of our standards work, we screen for any kind of advertising, because if there's any kind of advertising, it's a risk for us. Whether you're a child or an adult, it's a risk.
So you have alluded to it because you were looking at your results. You've created a special tool that is designed to figure out what a given app is actually doing.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about this tool. What is it? What are you looking for with this tool, and how do you attempt to detect it? For example, how do you identify where the traffic is going?
Yeah. So I'm going to name the tool. Everybody can look at this. It's an app microscope. App microscope displays what we call safety labels. And it displays safety labels for all of the apps that we audited in the benchmark and ones that we continue to add more and more to it over time. So the safety label is designed to give you an accurate readout of what the measured risks are within the app itself. So using the app as designed, what are the safety risks? And this is an important thing that I also want to underscore, is that we call these programmatic risks or programmatic harms. Mm-hmm. These are the harms that are baked into the product when you use it as designed. We're not talking about the likelihood of a data breach. And maybe this is a good time for me to just rattle off my distinction between safety and security. You, with your deep security background, right? I'd be interested in your feedback on this too. So here's how I describe it. Security is interested in preserving the integrity of the system as it was designed, and making sure that the system continues to behave as it was designed. Safety is making sure that the system as designed isn't harming people or societies.
Yeah. No, I'd say that's a good one. The classic cybersecurity is there's the CIA triad. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that's all kind of generic stuff about the service itself. It doesn't get into the notion of personal harm or personal effects. So yeah, I think that's a very valid distinction.
Yeah,
and useful.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, another way to say it is that cybersecurity is really interested in protecting the assets of the company to a significant degree. That's what it's about. But safety is about protecting human beings from unreasonable harm and unreasonable risk. Okay, so anyway, that's what our label does. Our label is designed to expose what are those programmatic risks in there, the programmatic harms. They're unavoidable. They're invisible to a large degree. And so we've started building this, and we're nowhere near done, but we've started with including the privacy risks, the places where your data is going places that are unexpected, unwanted, risky, and also just to provide a deeper awareness of just how much data does this service have about you. And so what we do is we manually test an app, and we use a lot of external databases, and we do some programmatic stuff that we do on the data. But we look at the experience of testing. We look for ads, we look for things, and we look for the use of web view. We look at just, what is the app doing? But all the while we're doing that, we're collecting the network traffic to and from the app. So we're able to see exactly who the app is talking to. And so on that other example that I said, there were 100 and some odd companies, unique companies that the app was communicating with. We observed that. We just are reporting back what we observe using the app as designed. Nothing special going on.
Now, do you have the capability in your test harness to use like a burp proxy kind of a thing where you can look into the actual traffic, like you could proxy the HTTP traffic so you could actually see what's being transmitted?
Is exactly what we do. We use tools like that. We use that when we're auditing websites, but we use other tools for mobile apps. And yeah, and we're people have been doing a lot of this for a long time, and we're able to stand on the shoulders of people
Yeah.
who've come before us and the tools that exist are ready for us. So that's exactly what we do.
So I'm also curious. There's the actual data which you could look at, which is great. But how much can you actually determine, like forensically, by looking at the metadata, like when the connections are made, or how often they're made, or how much data is transmitted, like number of bytes.
Yeah.
Maybe what kind of computer connection protocols are used. Does that metadata also? Do you have a way to analyze that and glean information as well?
I think so. We haven't done it yet. We have it, and we've started to kind of peel that onion, because it is every time we do a quantitative analysis like this, it takes a lot longer than you might think to figure out, like, okay, what we're reading the tea leaves, and are the tea leaves, like, what are they telling us? And are we sure that's what they're telling us? And are we really sure that that's what they're telling us? So we haven't started to analyze. We have the data. We could do it. We're resource constrained, but so we haven't done a lot of that. But in the safety label, we do give you some quantitative information about how much of the traffic. So we list all the third-party subdomains. Actually, we list the company. We don't list the subdomain because we thought that might be too much for people. We do
Sure.
have a subdomain privacy risk dictionary publicly available
Okay.
on our website. We also have a company privacy risk dictionary and a SDK privacy risk dictionary. So all of our risk scores for those entities are all publicly available. And a huge caveat here, we are constantly refining the scoring.
Sure.
Because
I'll bet.
the more we learn, and the more we realize, like, oh, we know so much more. We've actually, that's the wrong category for that. That's not, that app is not, that subdomain is not doing that. It's doing this, and therefore it's riskier, less risky, whatever. So we are constantly reworking, and we are in the middle. Like, by the end of March, we will have new scores for all the apps in the App Store.
Well, this reminds me.
Sorry,
That's
misspoke.
right.
Not the App Store. There's 5 million apps in the App Store. We haven't done them all. Yeah.
This reminds me a little bit of when I was talking to, I forget the gentleman's name, about dark patterns and the work being done to study dark patterns. And a lot of what they had to do, honestly, was come up with just a taxonomy, trying to figure out how to categorize and break down what they're seeing in a meaningful way so that they could, across different apps, kind of put them in bins, or put them in categories, or coming up with how many dimensions to your risk there are, because I'm sure it's probably not just a single continuum. There's probably different things that.
That's right.
Yeah.
You teed me up beautifully. Just before this call, we have a Tiger team working on that very topic, dark patterns. Dark patterns is next. Here's what's so the safety label has privacy risks, and not even all of them right now. But here's what's being added. Low hanging fruit security risks that we can see in the app. Things like the password's being entered in the clear, there's no obfuscation or whatever. Like these really obvious, like, things that we can see happening. So security risks are coming. It's not anywhere like a robust NIST, nothing like that. Just low hanging fruit. Dark patterns are coming next in the label. And I wonder if it's Harry Brignall is the guy you.
Well, I wanted to interview him, but there's another gentleman. I think it was Purdue, even my alma mater, who was doing some work on dark patterns. I interviewed him.
They do, yeah. So we've been working with Noreen Weissel on this for a little while. She's a UX expert, and she has synthesized for us all of the dark pattern taxonomies, because there's multiple, of course, all of the definitions, and we've assembled them all, and we've been going through them and identifying, like, the atomic level dark patterns that we want to measure and how we want to cluster those and how we want to score them. We will be adding those to the safety label here soon. Not soon. What am I saying? It'll take a little while, but we're hard at work on it, and yeah, so it's a totally different dimension. Yeah. And so that overall score that we have right now, that app score, it really should be thought of as a privacy score, because that's what it is right now. But when we add in the dark patterns, do we have then a dark pattern score? And here's my gut level on this. I think we're going to end up having scores that look like privacy score, autonomy score. So, because sometimes a dark pattern becomes a privacy risk.
Mm.
Sometimes it's just flagrant manipulation and a loss of autonomy.
Yeah.
And so we're just starting with this, but they're definitely, these will be separate, because one of the things we have learned recently is that trying to combine and roll up into a single score, it just loses too much resolution.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and just for the audience's sake, in case a dark pattern would be an example is like something actually the FTC I think has recently come out to try to fix is be able to click to cancel, like the real easy to get into something, really hard to get out. I think they called that the Roach Motel. That
Roach
was one
Motel.
Of the,
Or no, something like that. Yeah.
Well, that's got different names. Depends on who you ask,
Yeah.
right? At one point that was called the Roach Motel dark pattern, but the other one is popping up a thing where the really big bright red button that is what they want you to click, and it's got some euphemistic thing. This is the one that always gets me is, would you like to sign up for our newsletter? And there's a yes, please, help me learn more. And then underneath that is a little gray on black link that says no, that's okay. I already know everything I need to know.
Yeah.
Right. Which, they're obviously digging at you there and trying to get you to say, well, maybe I don't know everything.
Yeah.
So those are dark patterns for the, just for reference's sake. What about things like for security, back to some of the security aspects? Do you look for connections that are not encrypted, for example, and maybe transmitting things in the clear that way?
We will. That's part of, so we just at the end of last year identified the list of things that we want to include in the label for the security risks, and we will start implementing that this year.
Okay, so I'm really curious to know how hard is it to figure out, just from external analysis, because you're probably not getting help with this, because, for example, I wish that all software came with a software bill of materials and SBOM, but they don't. So until then, when the publishers are required, like, food, to tell you what's inside, how do you, without having the benefit of that kind of information from the manufacturer, the maker of the software, how do you figure out what's inside of it? Like, how do you determine which SDKs are there? They're probably not telling you.
Yeah, they don't tell us. And so we utilize a third-party database for that. And that's where we get that information from. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is that one of the databases you said was public, and other people look at that too?
No,
or is that something you have private access to?
It is not public. Should we talk a little bit about our plan on that?
Sure, if you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, we think it should be public.
Mm-hmm.
We think that it's an ingredients label of a sort, and we get ingredients labels for things that we consume, except not technology. We don't. Technology is a deep, dark secret, right? Heaven forbid we actually know what's going on under the hood of this stuff. And so, yes, we think that everybody has a right to know an SBOM or just, what's going on in the app, the list of SDKs. And so we are going to start looking to see if there's interest in doing an open source project around that.
Well, and software bill of materials is something I talked with Alan Friedman about this way back in the day. And whenever I meet up with him at B-Sides or DEF CON, usually it's at the pool party. So we've had a few. We'll still get into SBOMs and talk SBOMs all night. But just to give you an idea, the audience an idea of how this might play out. If I have an application that's built on 100 different SDKs, and I could, or my phone could present or check what is in there and what versions of what SDKs are in there, when one of those inevitably has a software bug in it, I could automatically determine all the apps I have that are vulnerable and either disable them, warn me that I need to update them, and perhaps go ahead and automatically update them. This is a big security thing. Privacy aside, this is a huge security benefit if we could do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. An example of that was the PushWhoosh SDK. That was one that we discovered was actually a Russian company that was masquerading itself a little bit, not overtly. It was trying to hide the fact that it was a Russian company, and it was used in military apps, training apps and stuff. And that was one example of, and then was PushWhoosh that one? Yeah, and then there was another one where it was the SDK, the company went out of business, and it was a dangling domain. but it was still in millions of handsets and thousands of apps. But it was a dangling domain. And that one, we got Apple. They actually bought the SDK. They won't admit it.
Explain what you mean by a dangling domain.
So you know how, I don't know how technical this audience is, but most of us have bought domains at one time in our life, maybe, like your vanity domain or whatever,
Sure.
LisaLeVasseur.com. And there's that option of like renew automatically every year. And when you don't click on that and you don't pay your bill or your, credit card expires, as happens, this happened to us recently, actually, there's a grace period of time. But if that expires, that domain goes back into the pool for somebody else to buy. It becomes a dangling domain, and somebody else can buy that up. And in fact, somebody will. There are organizations, not nice organizations, kind of, questionable organizations that actually spend a lot of time monitoring that grace period.
Yep.
You can monitor that, and they will wait for that period and then swoop it up and pick up any domain with a fairly sizable audience associated with it in the past. And then what they do is they put a honeypot on it or something. They basically will open a malicious site. So it goes from dangling domain to a potentially malicious domain. And then if you've got that domain that was central to the SDK, it's preloaded in all those apps that are using the SDK. And so you've got just this potential for lots of people stumbling into that new malicious domain.
And that has been exploited quite a bit. And there's been some other really weird esoteric versions of that sort of an exploit where they take over a domain that was abandoned. But let's say it's just an analytics domain, and the company goes out of business. If I pounce on that domain and take it over, all of a sudden I'm just going to start getting all of that information that was used to go to the analytics company and do whatever I want with it, because my app is pre-programmed to send it that data. Yeah. All right. So Apple's App Store and the Google Play Store, I don't know if they have something similar, but certainly in the Apple App Store, there's this feature they call privacy nutrition labels. That sounds very similar to what you're doing, and supposedly calls out what data each app collects and what they're doing with that data. So having done this yourself, how accurate are those labels, certainly compared to what you've seen? Do you know if Apple actually verifies these claims, or is this just picky swear by the developer?
Okay, here's what I know. Here's what I know about this. There is, I think, a rather sizable organization at Apple that is overseeing this work. I don't know. I have no insights into how they do it, how large the team is, anything like that. There is a similar thing. Android has, honest to God, it's called a safety label, which is very interesting to me. But there have been reports, there have been organizations, I want to say Mozilla or somebody had published something last year that the data in one or both of the stores was not matching at all to what was happening. We have not scrutinized it in that way for those particular kinds of errors. I would say my speculation is that they're not 100% accurate. I would imagine they're not. They're simply not 100% accurate.
I assume there's got to be an overlap in the Venn diagram of the apps you've tested versus the apps that they've got labels for. What have you found just empirically by comparing some of those?
We haven't compared them. That's what I'm saying. Unfortunately, we haven't done it. Yeah, we're so small. We're such a small organization, and most of our work is project-based grants, so we have to do the thing. Yeah, so we have to.
Well, and this is why standards and things like this are so important, because these things not only do they need to be human readable, which actually Apple does a pretty good job with. I mean, if you look at one of their privacy labels, it's actually pretty clear and concise and well organized. You can tell they put a lot of time and effort in that. But I eventually want all those things to be machine readable as well, so that third parties can let me take the Internet Safety Labs labels, let me take the Apple labels and automatically compare them to flag differences and automatically warn you when things like this come up. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I long for the day of when we have machine-readable SBOMs and machine-readable records of processing activities and, lots of other things. And it's honestly, it's we could stop spending today on AI and start spending on machine readable records of processing activities and other, safety enhancing things, and that would be a happy moment for me. That would be a much better investment in our yeah.
Well, so maybe the optimist to me says maybe we could actually use AI to do some of those things, and we could actually get a little bit of both. But
yeah,
all right,
potentially.
One
thing I want to say, one thing about the Apple labels. So the Apple labels, they don't tell you where the data is going. I mean, I think they do a nice job of telling you how the data is being used and whether it's personal information or non-personal information, but they don't tell you where it's going. And this is actually this is a pet peeve of mine of all of any kind of bills that have been around on this, trying to force an explicit list of who are the third parties receiving data, which is why we're so kind of anal about it in our labels, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. It's like, I don't care about what you're telling me. I want to know what the product is actually doing.
Right.
And one of the characteristics about technology, software in particular, it's sort of no longer, I think in mathematics they call it a bounded system. It's no longer a bounded system. That real-time bidding architecture that we were talking about, that's a completely unbounded system, because the players that could be listening, receiving the bids, the listeners, if you want to call them that, they come and go.
Yeah.
It's never the same river twice. And, you never know who all of those thousands of entities are going to be. And, they flicker in and out of existence even. So it's programmatic, but it's not predictable necessarily. And so that is hard to label.
Yeah.
As a priori, it's hard to label. You can do that, which is why we do snapshots, right? Like, this is what happened when we tested it. Yeah.
How important are the non-technical aspects of these apps? Like, for example, when you're talking about the safety or the risk score that you give to companies or to domains, how does knowing who the company is that owns that factor into this? How do you judge the safety of a particular company, or do you look at their business model? Do you look at where they're located, or what they're how do you evaluate that?
Yeah, all of the above. So the biggest factor for privacy risk for us, for a company, for example, is whether or not the company monetizes personal information. Okay. If the company is known to monetize personal information, okay, so how do we know that, and what does that even mean? Well, if a company, so it could be as simple as this, and yes, we will score you as monetizing personal information for this. If you have an advertising, if we see a tracker, an advertising tracker, like a behavioral advertising tracker, you're monetizing personal information.
Yeah.
And you may disclose that in hopefully you're disclose that in your privacy policy. But so it could be as small as that, but it could also be you are a registered data broker in the state of California, or in the state of Oregon, or in the state of Texas, or Vermont. Or you could be a known entity that shares or sells. See, the problem with the data broker registry is that the penalties are so small, there are a lot of entities that don't register that should, and also the data broker law is not robust. So there's a lot of entities that deal in personal information that don't have to register because they're not technically a data broker, or they just haven't registered. So we see you if you're like that, and we've identified certain industries like identity resolution platforms, and customer data platforms, and data management platforms. All of these are very high risk entities for monetizing personal information in bulk. So it's really about that monetization of personal information, because the incentive is so strong that the risk to you is high that your data is being somehow shepherded off and monetized in this way.
Do you try to make a judgment at all about the I don't know, the location of the company?
We
Like
do.
let's say it's a Chinese company
We
versus
do.
a US. Okay, so how does that factor into your risk score?
So it does factor. So our score is a calculation, and please don't ask me what it is because it's too complicated and I do not remember. And we're just changing it. But we do take the company headquarters location into consideration.
Okay.
We also know, but do not currently factor in the parent company organization.
Mm.
I'll mention one interesting, to me anyway, one interesting note is one of the most difficult things that we do is try to figure out who the darn company is responsible for the app. It is incredibly difficult to to pinpoint it with precision.
And again, oftentimes on purpose, right? A lot of these companies are purposefully trying to be obfuscating who their parent company
That's
is.
right.
It's
That's
not just that it's a Byzantine, business thing, or it's they're trying to do this in some cases.
Yes, it's a combination of Byzantine and deliberate obfuscation. Yeah, so this person spends an inordinate amount of time literally going back and trying to figure out exactly who the company is, because we believe with our Me2B DNA, we're, this relationship between the consumer and the vendor mediated through the platform that we're using matters. It matters. And who's responsible for this thing that I'm using? And it's, so we factor in the location of the corporate headquarters of the thing, and anything that is on the state list of, I forget which agency publishes this,
like
government
the entity
agency
list or whatever. Or?
It's the foreign enemies list or something like that.
And that exists. Yep, that's a thing.
So we use that, and it factors in.
How do I use this tool? So I go to the App Microscope website, which I'll definitely put in the show notes, and I go there and I look up my app. How do I find the apps I'm looking for? What do I see when I pull up my app? How do I kind of digest and understand? Because you've got like 3 layers of detail and things like that. Tell us a little bit about the experience of using the app. And then what I really like to know too is, for the people who should know this in EdTech, like how might parents or school administrators or teachers and of course just regular people for regular apps too, but we talked about EdTech. How might different people use this to help evaluate these apps?
Yeah. So you can go to appmicroscope.org and you can search by name or by vendor. If you know the part of an app name or the vendor, you'll get a list of results from that. You can also search by category. So you can pull up all of the EdTech student information systems if you wanted to. So it's not super as robust as we might like it to be, but you have some abilities. You can sort by score as well. And the label itself, as you mentioned, there's 3 sort of depths to it. There's a kind of headline, which is really just the top level score for the app, and that is a privacy risk score, and it gives you the reasons for why it got that and that sort, and then some metadata about the app itself. And then the middle section is the summary, like the nutrition facts summary, if you will. And that gives you a summary of this is how many third-party companies we found. This is how many data brokers. This is how many subdomains, unique subdomains, and this is how risky they were. And this is how many data broker subdomains we saw. And same thing with the SDKs. And then also a little bit more about what are the risky permissions that the app has access to. We're going to be building that up over time. So in terms of how we'd like to have them use this, weirdly enough, I will say this, our apps, our labels are really designed for regulatory enforcement, litigation, privacy litigation, journalists, policymakers. It's evidence. Our apps are evidence as to what the behavior of the app actually is. But if you are a school or a concerned parent, schools should use this to supplement their vetting. Just look it up. Contact us. Ask us to audit an app for you. Happy to do it. Reach out to us at any time. We'll audit an app.
Oh, that's great.
If and when we can, we'll get around to it. But parents also, if your son or daughter or your student is being required to use something, look it up, and if it looks disturbing to you, bring it into the school and say, hey, explain this. Like, what I'm concerned about this. Are you? And it's a tool that starts a dialogue, that starts a discussion around it, and helps people communicate using sort of this neutral information that is like, it's just a snapshot. This is just a snapshot.
Yeah.
You may quibble with our where we put you in the sorting hats, like you may not be happy with your location, but again, we're like really open to have that discussion. If you think we've got it wrong, we're happy to have that discussion.
Just out of curiosity, have you gotten any specific pushback from apps that have gotten really poor ratings?
No, I got that question this morning. I was presenting this morning earlier, and I think one of the things is that I think an organization might be so cautious to ensure that there's no history of their awareness of what the app is actually doing, that they don't even want to have any recorded communication with us around that.
All right, this has been fantastic. Really interesting stuff. Thank goodness you're doing what you're doing, and I wish you could do it for every app on the planet, but I know there's like millions of them. So I wish you all the money and resources you could throw at this.
Thank you.
So how can we, if the listeners are out there, how might we be able to support your efforts? And then, what's next for you guys? What's on your horizon? You mentioned a few of them as we were talking here, but what are some things that you've got coming up for Internet Safety Labs and App Microscope?
I'll do the first one first. So there's lots of ways you can participate with us and support us. We're open for donations. That is a very important thing to make sure we can continue to fund the work. And also, we have an open software safety standards panel. So if you are interested in having your voice be heard to say, I think we deserve to know this or that in safety labels, that's what our panel does. It's a place where we listen to everybody, and that panel is really the place where they define what they think needs to be in a safety label.
Okay.
And so it's a public space. Anybody can come. We limit industry. We only limit industry. And that's not been a problem for us. We have very little industry participation, but we want to make sure that this is really egalitarian. This is intended to be a voice of people in this thing. So you can participate. You can support us that way. The other thing, and this answers the what's on the horizon for us. What's on the horizon for us, we've actually been doing for a couple of months now, a pilot program that we call Safetypedia, where we are training people and certifying them to become ISL certified safety inspectors, specifically for privacy. And so we will train you how to do it. We'll give you those proxy tools. We'll set you up and walk you through all of this. And there's no cost because this is all pre-commercial. It's a little rough and ready, but it's we've been doing this for a while. And yeah, you can become a certified safety inspector, and you can audit whatever apps you want to audit. Every time you audit an app, it will generate a new safety label. And so this is a way for us to, one, build community, because I think we're reaching the conclusion that we really need to have much more community engagement with everything that we're doing. And then also to grow the volume of safety labels that we have, not just within the US, but we can do a safety inspector can be anywhere in the world. And so having this, rich repository of the same app measured in multiple jurisdictions, multiple geographies all over the world by different testers entirely. Yeah. We're really excited about this program. So that's another way people can support and get involved.
And I would be really interested to see, especially if you could build up this community of sort of crowdsourced people to help you source these things, how these change over time, because they will. Absolutely, as new features get added, new SDKs get thrown in, or the owner of the app changes, they may change.
Gosh.
And I'd be willing to bet that these apps act differently depending on where they are as well.
Yes, we know they do. I was talking to EU Commission person yesterday or 2 days ago, and she was like, yeah, at least we over here don't have as much data collection when using certain apps as you experience in the US. So, I mean,
presumably because of GDPR or similar.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Lisa, that was really very interesting. And again, this is great work. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And I hope you are successful, because if you are, we all benefit. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Carrie, so much for the opportunity. I can't tell you how much it means to me. Thank you.
Really glad to have had Lisa on the show. They are really doing some great work. And man, again, I had kids in school when the pandemic hit, and I got really weirded out by some of the stuff that they were forcing them to do. And you really, honestly, didn't have a whole lot of choice. And because some of the stuff is so invasive and mandatory in many cases, there's a lot of companies out there that said, hey, this is a gold mine. Let's figure out what these kids are doing. They have to install this software. What can we learn about these kids? And, let's advertise to them and maybe sell this data to other people as well. That's just horrific. That's predatory. And so we need groups like Lisa's, who are trying to expose what is really going on in these things so that we can make an informed decision. So parents and teachers, and of course the students themselves, as well as, administrators and the IT departments in the schools, whoever's making the purchasing decisions or the recommendations for the software. This is a fantastic resource for them, but it's also a resource for us. They're not just doing EdTech software. They're doing stuff that you and I use as well. So I'll tell you what, do yourself a favor when you get a chance and go check out the App Microscope website. It's just appmicroscope.org. Just like it sounds. Of course, there's a link in the show notes. Search for some apps. Look up things like Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook. Check out their score and then dig deeper, like expose more details and actually look into what those things are doing, what they have measured them doing, and it will just blow your mind. And if you do have kids that are in school and there is mandatory software that's installed on their laptops or that they want them to install on their phones, and this is happening more and more today, check with your kids. Maybe you don't even know this is happening, but figure out all the apps that they've got installed that the school recommends and use this tool to see what they're up to. And then once you find out, maybe have a conversation with your school board or with your administrator or with just the kid's teacher. And obviously with your kids as well, if you find anything in there that bothers you or gives you pause. I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say that's probably going to happen. So give it a shot. Now, Lisa mentioned a way for you to help them if you'd wish in multiple ways. Obviously, the first big way is just to donate money. If you want to support the kind of things they're doing here, then, go to their website, internetsafetylabs.org, and there's a real big donate button at the upper right. And personal donations, one-time donations, I'm sure that's all great. But if you are somehow in a position to line up maybe a big dollar donor, or even honestly, if your company has matching funds for donations, look into that as well. These guys could definitely use your help. Lisa mentioned also ways you can get involved in some panels or other groups that can give feedback on their product, or perhaps even do some crowdsourcing on the testing of these apps. If that is something that interests you, there is a form on the website for joining their panel. Or otherwise use their contact information to reach out about potentially helping out if you've got some basic technical skills and you would like to help them test some more apps that I'm sure they could use all the help they can get, reach out to them that way and see if you could lend them a hand. Lisa did mention Julie and Andy Liddell from the EdTech law firm. I'm actually already in talks with Andy to do an interview. We've actually postponed it a couple times, but that's worked well, I think, because they are going to be releasing some new information, I think, maybe about lawsuits. It was kind of vague, but it sounds like there's going to be some things coming up that would be good if we could talk about, and we couldn't now. So anyway, that may not happen until June or so, but that is on my schedule, and you will be hearing from Andy about some of these EdTech lawsuits coming up soon. If you'd like to go back and listen to my interview with Dr. Johnny Ryan about real-time bidding, that was a great interview. I put a link in the show notes. But also, just FYI, I recently interviewed Zach Edwards about the Gravy Analytics data breach, which will be airing soon, so stay tuned. And in there, we will also discuss real-time bidding in detail as well. Finally, I was trying to remember the name of Colin Gray, Dr. Colin Gray, I believe, who's at Purdue University, and we did an interview about dark patterns. That is also fascinating. And if you'd like to check that out, look in the show notes for a link to that interview. Now, I mentioned Burp Suite early on. If that is something that you're curious about, if you'd like to do some kind of light-level quote-unquote hacking, if you'd like to investigate what some of your apps are doing, there is a free version of this tool called Burp Suite, which includes this special proxy. And in fact, they've even now configured a dedicated web browser for this, which was part of the setup for this. We had to kind of modify some things on your web browser, which I would actually recommend you don't do. because you're installing these root certificates. Anyway, I don't want to get too technical on that, but if this interests you at all, look in the show notes. There's a link to how to set that up. I've played with it before in some of the hacking classes I've taken, and it's really pretty cool. So the patrons, of course, will get bonus content on Thursday. In that content, Lisa and I talk a little bit more about AI safety and standardization of software product safety in general. We talk a lot about standards and how big companies like to co-opt standards and bend them to their will, something that's often referred to as embrace, extend, and extinguish. Along the way, as we're talking about this, we actually discovered, and we didn't know this until we were talking about it during the bonus content, that we actually share a lot of super geeky industry experience in telecom standards. And then we also talk a little bit about a very interesting and disturbing technology called identity resolution platform. There's different versions of it, but it's kind of like the way marketers fingerprint you and track you around the web besides using cookies. And frankly, now I think I'm gonna need to find somebody to interview on that topic because it's very prevalent and it's kind of scary, and it's something I think we all need to understand. All right, as I said, I've got a news show for you next week where we'll talk about the Signal debacle and much, much more. And I've got some great interviews coming down the pike too. So if you haven't already, subscribe and then you won't miss any of that. That'll do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your garbage stuff.